Vulnerability is not weakness. It's our greatest measure of courage. Hi, my name is Eric Pang. I've read over 1,000 books and connected 6,000 of my top learnings in my digital notebook. We're going to take a look at Brené Brown's quote, ask some questions, connect them with my digital notebook to see what we can learn. Let's go. So I've got a number of questions here related to Brené's quote. First, what is vulnerability? What are its costs? What are its benefits? What are the costs of not being vulnerable? And how might vulnerability require courage? So let's dive into the first question. Uncertain disclosure feels vulnerable. What feels risky and vulnerable is when you are especially uncertain about the impact of your disclosure. So this idea is when you're not quite sure how someone's going to react to what you say or how you act, whether they might judge you, whether they might harm you, and there's a lack of trust. That's when acting or saying something can feel the most vulnerable. Related to this idea, going to the second question of what are the costs of vulnerability, is this idea that our ego is vulnerable. Our ego or self-conception could be pictured as a leaking balloon, forever requiring the helium of external love to remain inflated and ever vulnerable to the smallest pinpricks of neglect. So when we connect this idea that our ego is vulnerable with the last note about how when we're not sure how someone's going to react to what we say or do, we're constantly concerned about being pricked, that our ego will be popped, that our love will be withdrawn, and that our lack of worthiness or smallness will be revealed. So let's take a look at this question of what are some of the benefits of vulnerability. Self-disclosure increases trust. So letting yourself be more fully known is crucial to developing exceptional relationships. Self-disclosure creates more opportunities to connect and increases trust. It is also enormously validating to be accepted for who you really are. So when we are vulnerable and we're willing to let ourselves be truly known, to really speak our mind and be honest, to act according to what we believe in, then others start to see who we are. And that allows this virtuous cycle of connection and trust and love. And so we build much deeper relationships as a result of being vulnerable. Joy requires vulnerability. This quote is also from Brené Brown. When we lose our tolerance for vulnerability, joy becomes foreboding. So when we stop allowing ourselves to be vulnerable, we start constantly being afraid of feeling joy because at any moment that could just be taken away from us. Joy is probably the most vulnerable feeling or emotion that we can experience. We are afraid to soften into it and to lean fully into it because we're waiting for the other shoe to drop. So Brené Brown had this story about how in many movies or stories, you might have an opening scene where there is a family, let's say on vacation. It's a happy scene. Everything's going great. And constantly you're waiting for the other shoe to drop. Like you're waiting for shit to hit the fan, something to go wrong. And when we are living in a constant state of alert and lack of vulnerability, our guard is always up. We're constantly shielding ourselves. Then we're also shielding ourselves from the experience of joy. And we don't let ourselves lean into the experience of really being alive. What are the costs of not being vulnerable? So if we kind of talked about the costs of vulnerability, we talked about the benefits of vulnerability, but what if we're not vulnerable? What happens? So let's explore this idea of the creeping constraint of secrets. Once we've come to be known a certain way, we often feel bound to behave consistently, becoming less and less truly known. The cost is more isolation and what we call the creeping constraint of secrets. So there's this idea of consistency bias where when we act a certain way, let's say with a group of strangers or a new group that we're with, we feel the urge to reinforce that self-image. And if we are not vulnerable, if we are not really showing who we are, and we're hiding our thoughts, we're constantly pushing down our thoughts, we're constantly restraining the actions that we would like to take, in essence, we are isolating ourselves from other people. We are becoming more and more alone and less seen by others. And so we become this being that exists in a shell where we're almost kind of like observing and watching other people, and nobody really knows who we are. And we become this secret being. Another cost of not being vulnerable is that social networks are decreasing. So in 1985, the most common number of friends was 3. And in 2004, the most common number of friends was 0. And when I'm referring to this statistic, it's a research that was done over who are the people with whom you discussed matters important to you. So if you lost your job, or you feel like you're struggling with depression, or there's some deep challenge that you're facing in your life, how many friends do you feel like you're comfortable going to and sharing that with and getting support from those friends? And this is really a disturbing trend because it went from 3 to 0 in the matter of 2 decades. I think a lot of this is influenced by the growth of technology and social media. You think about Instagram and Twitter and Facebook. A lot of what you see visually out there is like the best image that people put forward. You don't see all the shit that's happening behind the scenes. And it really requires vulnerability to open up. And the more that people are seeing just the surface, the more other people the people that are consuming that content are kind of withdrawing. And they're also only showing the surface. And this becomes this vicious cycle where we're all just getting to know each other less. We're all becoming less vulnerable, and we're all becoming more isolated. So how might vulnerability require courage? Strong relationships enter uncertainty. So to really experience true contact with another person, you must enter a realm of uncertainty together. When you first get to know somebody, or even if you're with somebody who you've known for a really long time, there might still be areas where I have a mask on with my wife or my family. And we wear that mask because we're not sure how that other person's going to react if we reveal who we truly are. There is a realm of uncertainty, a certain level of risk, of vulnerability to share who you truly are. And yet we can't experience true contact. There can't really be this deep connection between people unless we go into that realm of uncertainty. And that's where kind of it's related to this idea of courage, because to build that strong relationship, to go into that uncertainty, to be vulnerable requires a great amount of courage, because you're putting yourself out there. You're putting yourself at risk of being hurt, which is related to this idea of we fear losing conditional love. Unconditional love corresponds to one of the deepest longings, not only of the child, but of every human being. On the other hand, to be loved because of one's merit, because one deserves it, always leaves doubt. Maybe I did not please the person whom I want to love me. Maybe this or that. There is always a fear that the love could just disappear. So this again goes to our deepest kind of human need of being loved. And we are vulnerable for a good reason, because we're afraid of losing that love. And in today's world of capitalism and constantly proving yourself when you're a child by getting good grades, when you get older by making money, acquiring material goods to show that you are worthy of love, of status, and are a lot of marketing and advertising really feeds on this, is it just reinforces our desire to withdraw, to not be vulnerable, because we're constantly afraid of that bubble, that ego balloon popping, of us losing that love. And we feel that we are loved not because we deserve that love, that it's unconditional, but many times we feel that we are loved because we have to do something. We have to be a certain way. We have to act and think and say what other people want us to act and think and say. And so, again, we are afraid of being vulnerable to act according to who we truly are because we're afraid of losing that conditional love. So when we take a look at all of these questions and ideas, we kind of explored the idea that vulnerability feels uncertain, it feels risky, and our ego is vulnerable. We're constantly afraid of losing our love, the love that feeds us. And to share who we are feels risky because we might get attacked in return. We might lose that love. And some of the benefits of vulnerability that we discussed is we build trust when we're vulnerable. It creates the possibility of deeper connection and relationship with other people. And being vulnerable allows us to truly experience joy. It allows us to truly experience the positive emotions in life. Because when we're shutting down the bad, when we're trying to push out the bad, we're also shutting down the good. And then we basically become unfeeling machines that don't really experience life. We talked about how the cost of not being vulnerable is the creeping constraint of secrets, that we withdraw into ourselves and we become this secret person that nobody ever really gets to know, and we become isolated and alone, which is reinforced by the research that shows that the number of supportive friends that we trust and feel comfortable talking to when we're in times of trouble and challenge has massively fallen. And we talked about how vulnerability requires courage, it requires uncertainty, and we constantly fear losing this love that we feel is conditional. And for us to truly reach out and to touch somebody deeply, to actually get that love that we feel we deserve, or maybe we're afraid we don't deserve, requires us to leap into that unknown, to take that step into the void, and to truly experience vulnerability. And that is what Brené Brown is talking about here, that vulnerability is not weakness. It's our greatest measure of courage.